And that was how horrific the moment was, how horrible that 10-minute period is, however long it takes for us to kill him, how horrible it was because it was so antiseptic, because it was so sterile, because it was so quiet, because it was so inhumane. The humanity of life was absent in that execution chamber. It was absent in the witness chamber where I stood. It was absent from everything I could discern in the witness chamber that was beside me. There was silence, virtual silence throughout the whole process. Eric's body responded. Eric didn't utter any final statements, although as we entered the room, Eric acknowledged our presence and mouthed the words, "Thank you," and we heard him. He didn't even speak them clearly, but he just whispered them. We could hear them through the amplification. He said, "Thank you, it's going to be all right." And then he lowered his head and closed his eyes. The warden asked Eric, "Do you have any final statement?" Eric said, "No, warden." And we had already been advised that if Eric were to say no, warden, or if he were to say nothing, that immediately the warden would give the signal to the people in the other room that the procedure could start. So as soon as Eric said no, warden, the warden looked to a door that opened. We couldn't see anything other than a door open across the room, and the warden said, "The procedure can begin," or something. I don't literally remember what he said, but he said something like, "You can begin." And at that point, Eric closed his eyes. He had already closed his eyes before the warden said that. And 15, 20, maybe 30 seconds passed before I saw Eric's chest rise. He had been breathing. I'd been watching him breathe. And he took a deep breath, and that breath paused for a moment. And then there was a sputtering sound that came from him. The chaplain beforehand had characterized what we would likely hear as a snore. I think of it as a reverse snore. Most snores that I know are, you hear the air coming in like that. Eric's snore was a sputtering as he was exhaling. And there were 3 sputters, 3 relatively quick exhales. The final one, the loudest of them, and then there was nothing. Eric's body was still. His right eye opened slightly, and that was the eye that was facing us. I could see his left eye through a reflection in a plexiglass window that was directly across from us. Immediately beside that window was a small door with 2 catheters streaming from. One of them I could see affixed to his left arm in the reflection. The other one I could see affixed to his right arm, which was immediately in front of us. So I could see the reflection of his left side. His left eye remained completely closed. His right eye opened slightly and never changed. His right eye remained open through the rest of the hour that we waited there. That was really only about 5 minutes, maybe 7, but it just seemed like an extraordinarily long time. We had been warned in advance that it would be a long period that might seem like 20 minutes, but that usually it was only 5 or 7. And so we had been told to anticipate this long wait. We stood there in the room for this hour, and as we stood there, the warden looked at the chaplain. The chaplain was immediately in front of us with his back slightly turned toward us. He was holding what looked like a Bible in his left hand, and his right hand was on Eric's leg. And I watched his left hand, and it was relatively stable. The warden watched the chaplain watched the warden, and at one time I saw the chaplain's finger start to tap the Bible, and I watched the warden watch his finger. I then watched, and about 8, maybe 10 seconds later, the chaplain's fingers started tapping the Bible again very, very aggressively. And then seconds later, maybe 30 seconds later, the warden turned around and opened the door, didn't say a word, but turned and opened the door, and in walked a man with a stethoscope over his neck and a jacket on. It wasn't a white jacket, but it was a regular kind of jacket. He walked in. I immediately recognized him as one of the local physicians in town. A very kind man. I know him in the community as a very, very kind-hearted physician. He actually provides medical assistance at virtually no cost. He will do office visits for $25, so people who are relatively indigent can get access to medical care through him. I don't know him personally, but I know of him, and he's got a very, very good reputation for being a wonderful assistant in the community. He also witnesses and pronounces death. He also pronounces death at all of the executions. He doesn't witness them, but he's brought into the room after the two witnesses who are the official witnesses, the warden and the chaplain, believe that the condemned has expired. I don't know if the tapping of the fingers was a signal. My suspicion is that the warden is feeling for a pulse in the vein of the condemned's leg. The chaplain told us that he would put his hand on the leg of the offender for human contact, and that's probably how it may have ultimately started. My suspicion is that he's feeling for some pulse or for something, and I don't know what happens at the last moment of death. Watching that, my suspicion is when his heart stops, there must be some kind of fluttering of some sort, and I think that's where the tapping was, but I don't know that. That's my suspicion. So after the doctor comes into the room, there's still not a word said. The doctor takes a pencil flashlight out of his pocket, and he moves to Eric's left eye. The first time I see Eric's left eye open, and he shines a light in it, and I'm looking at that through the reflection in the plexiglass. He then moves to his right eye and does the same. When he lets go of Eric's left eye, his eye closes completely. When he lets go of his right eye, it again closes only partially, so his left eye remains open. The physician then puts his flashlight away and moves his hands and feels the left side and then the right side of Eric's carotid arteries, doesn't say a word. He then puts his stethoscopes into his ear, and he moves the sheet that was covering Eric's chest slightly away, clearly listens to Eric's chest in the center of his chest and then to the left side. He then looks up toward the chaplain and says, 6:20. He turns and walks away, which must be the pronounced time of death. So Eric was pronounced dead at 6:20, probably died at 6:17 or 6:18, but it took that maybe 2 minutes, maybe not, maybe it was only 15 seconds. At that time, the whole notion of time is invisible to me. I'm not sure how long it's taking. But Eric is pronounced dead, and that's the only word that is spoken after the warden has said everything can proceed, or whatever it was that the warden uttered. The warden and the chaplain then pull the sheet over Eric's face, and at that time, nothing is said. The warden returns to his position, the chaplain returns to his, which the warden is at the head of Eric, the chaplain is at the foot of Eric, and nothing is said. I hear movement in the room beside me, and I know that the witnesses for the victim's family are being escorted out. After about 2 minutes, our door opens, and Chris walks out first, one of the attorneys. Richard follows him, and I turn, and as I turn, the first person that I see is the woman who is the reporter for the Huntsville item. Young woman, Christine is her name, and she must be in her early 20s. And I know her because my wife has had interaction with her on a couple of occasions before, and had in fact met with her the day before Eric's execution. My wife does hospice work, and this is getting ready to be Hospice Awareness Week. And a year ago, my wife had been interviewed by Christine for a story in the local paper to try to encourage people to consider hospice as an option when their loved ones are dying. And so my wife had met with her in anticipation of this year's story, and she acknowledged that she was going to be at the execution, and my wife said, well, Dennis is going to be there, my husband's going to be there, and I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how he's going to be. And so Christine said, well, if you'd like, I'll give him a hug. If you don't mind, I'll give him a hug if he feels like he needs it. And so I had been forewarned that I was going to be eligible for a hug upon the execution. So when I turned, I saw Christine. To me, she looked frightened. I don't know if that's just her natural look, but she just looked very frightened. And so I gave her a one-armed hug as I was following Dick out the door, and that's the last I saw her. I never saw, and still haven't seen her since then. She must have exited